Good morning and welcome to Godly Play. I hope you're enjoying your summer so far. You know, the stories that we've been hearing about recently have been about a man named Paul. And he's certainly gotten into some unusual adventures. Well, Paul is well known for something else besides his unusual adventures. He's known for the letters that he wrote. Paul, in his adventures, visited a lot of places and met a lot of different people, mostly people that were trying to get the early Christian churches started, were trying to pass along the message of Jesus. And when Paul met these people and then he left to go on another traveling adventure, he would write a letter to the people that he met. He would write letters to encourage them, to give them advice about how to build the church, to explain different parts of Jesus's message. He wrote some letters to sort of introduce himself to places that he hadn't gone to yet. Well, today we're going to hear the story of a letter that he wrote to a church in Galatia. The people there were called Galatians. One of the very interesting things about Paul's letters is that so many of them, we'll count the number of letters in one of the upcoming stories, but so many of Paul's letters ended up as books of the Bible in the New Testament. Well, anyway, today's story is about a letter that Paul wrote to these people in Galatia called Galatians. See if you can find Galatia on one of the maps of Paul's journey. In today's letter, Paul told the people in Galatia that it was very important to act in the ways that the Holy Spirit would lead them to act. And the ways that he suggested that people should act, he called fruits of the Spirit, meaning fruits of the Holy Spirit. And he listed some of these fruits of the Spirit. They were love, that sounds pretty familiar, joy, peace. I think there's a lot of messages in the Bible that would like us to act with love, joy, and peace. Some of the other ways we should act, some of the other fruits of the Spirit, are patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility. Humility means being humble and not bragging about things that you do, and self-control. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, and self-control. Maybe when we're back together, we can talk about those fruits of the Spirit and different ways that we could act that would show that the Holy Spirit has given us those fruits too. Well, I want to show you another video now about some other fruits and vegetables, some real fruits and vegetables. And when we finish that video, I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the letters. So I'll be back with you real soon. Bye. Along the side wall here, we have a row of pumpkins, and they're already starting to get some blossoms. There's a really big one down there. Maybe I can get a close-up shot. I think the blossoms are where the pumpkin is going to grow. And then right next to the pumpkins, we have some squash. I think both green squash, which are called zucchini, and yellow squash, that are called yellow squash. And I thought I saw some blossoms on the squash too, but maybe not quite yet. Then over in this section, I have to be careful because the garden sort of slopes downward and I don't want to go rolling towards the back of the garden. Over in this section, we have some eggplant. I've never grown eggplant before, so this is a new one, but they have some pretty purple blossoms. And then we have the pepper section. I don't see any peppers growing yet. I have a few peppers in my garden box on my porch that I'll show you. But I saw a video that said it's not good if the peppers grow too early because then the plant doesn't have a chance to get big enough. And over here is our tomato crop, and I'm especially interested in this tomato crop, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. These tomato plants are growing well above the tops of their tomato cages already. There's a lot of yellow blossoms. That's where the tomatoes are going to grow. Here's some examples of the little yellow blossoms. And there's some tomatoes growing already. There's one. Most of the plants with tomatoes growing are in the back here. Hard for me to get to. And then over here in this corner, we have our lettuce crop, which is very pretty and colorful. I always like coming over here and looking at the lettuce crop. Now in between the vegetables, we have some flowers and we also have some herbs. And the reason we did this is because flowers are good pollinators. They help the blossoms on the vegetable plants turn into the vegetable, like eggplant and peppers and pumpkins. And some of the flowers have a nice smell, or at least what we think is a nice smell, but the animals off in the woods here, they don't particularly like the smell, so they stay away from the garden, which we want them to do. So I better go and get the water turned on now. We've had a few hot, dry days, and today's going to be another one, so I want to make sure the water gets the garden gets plenty of water. So I'm going to do that, but I'm going to be back in just a few minutes to tell you the story about the tomatoes and why I'm really interested in them and what they have to do with the letters of Paul. Back soon. So I'm back. The garden that I just showed you reminds me of Paul's letter to Galatians because of the fruits of the spirits, the fruits and vegetables. That's kind of an obvious thing, but there's another connection that I want to try to explain, and it has to do with the tomato plants. So we have a nice group of people in our neighborhood who take care of the garden, and we share the responsibilities of taking care of it. And when we were getting ready for planting in the spring, I said that I would take the responsibility for getting the tomato plants. One of my friends, who has really been the best leader of our gardening group, wanted to do the garden in a way called square foot gardening, and I'll explain that more when I see you. Anyway, she learned about square foot gardening from a pastor named Pastor Dave. And she visited his house to see the square-foot garden that he had at his house. And while she was visiting with Pastor Dave, he told her about another pastor called Pastor John. And Pastor John is the pastor of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church on the south side, and they have an annual tomato plant sale to raise funds for the church. And Pastor Dave suggested that we get some tomato plants from Pastor John. So I volunteered to get in touch with Pastor John and get the tomato plants. And I did. And I'm so glad I did, because Pastor John turned out to be one of the nicest men I've ever met and gave me lots of good advice about planting the tomatoes. He actually starts all the tomato plants from seeds. He grows them in the very early spring under grow lights in his garage, and then when they get strong enough and big enough, he sells them in the tomato plant sale. Now, the tomato plants that you just saw in our garden are about 5 times as big as they were when I got them from Pastor John. Anyway, let's go back to Paul and see what this has to do with Paul. So remember that I told you that one of the things that Paul is really well known for are his letters, and that we're going to talk about his letters. So we heard the story of the fruit of the spirits that Paul talked about in his letter to the Galatians. Well, I thought it would be a good idea if we wrote some letters of our own. Maybe you can try this. Miss Helen and I will try it. Maybe you can try it too. So I decided that my first letter was going to be a letter to Father John. So here it goes. I started it. Dear Father John, it's Rebecca Heineck. That's how I introduce myself to people that I don't know so well. Then once I know them better, they can call me Miss Becky if they want to. Okay, dear Father John, it's Rebecca Heineck. I hope you remember me from when I got the tomato plants from you. I just wanted to tell you how well the tomato plants are doing. They have grown way over the top of the tomato cages. The plants are strong, they have many yellow blossoms, and there are already many tomatoes sprouting. My gardening friends and I are so excited about how well the garden is doing so far. We're working hard, but joyfully, to take good care of the plants. I might have mentioned to you that I am a member of First United Methodist Church of Pittsburgh in Shadyside, and I teach a Sunday school class called Godly Play. The class is for young children. Over the past few weeks, we have been learning about Paul and some of his adventures. We heard about his conversion on the road to Damascus. We heard what happened to Paul and Silas when they were thrown in prison. And we heard about what happened when Paul's boat was shipwrecked. Now we are starting to learn about Paul's letters. The letter we are talking about now is the letter to the Galatians and the lesson about the fruit of the Spirit. Hearing about the fruits of kindness, goodness, and patience made me think of you. I thought it might be interesting to write some letters to other churches ourselves, and I really wanted to write to you. I feel very blessed to have met you, and I think about you every time I see the tomato plants. You are a blessing to our community, and I'm sure to your congregation especially. I will send you some pictures as our tomato plants continue to grow and the fruit ripens. And I hope that I see you again in person next year. Many thanks for sharing your gifts with us. Your friend, Rebecca Heineck. Okay, so I'm going to fold this letter up and I'm going to put it in an envelope. I guess I better sign it first. And I'm going to address it to Pastor John at the Ukrainian Orthodox Church on the south side. And I hope he gets it, and I just hope that he knows that he really touched my life in a positive way, and I can tell that he really understands about letting the fruits of the Spirit come into his life. So in the coming weeks, I hope we can talk about some of Paul's other letters, see who he wrote to and what he said to those congregations and early Christians. And I hope I see you again real soon. Bye-bye.